And you're being recorded.
All right. I'm going to share the screen.
Okay.
Just a second. Hold tight.
Okay.
Just 1 second. I just want to make it big for you.
Big screen.
All right.
You find somebody that is personal friends with the sheriff, and then we kind of get that.
That's my mom's boyfriend. Mom, you have to mute yourself.
I'm like,
So,
What?
You have to mute yourself.
Okay.
okay.
There you go.
He's on,
I mean,
he's
you
on
don't
the
have
phone.
to, but
you might want to.
No, he's on the phone. He's talking to somebody.
I got it. Okay. I'll just
Good.
mute everybody. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out. Can you see? You guys see this? Oh, okay, great. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Can you see
All right.
that?
We're good.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess, yeah, the myth of horizontality. I am not really trying to imply that like horizontality is a myth in the sense that it's a lie or that it's untrue. And I think in order for this idea to sort of like get transmitted smoothly, I felt like it was necessary to go through some terms first. So I think, we have to admit someone. Okay. So terms. Myth. So basically, in this case, I don't mean myth in a way that's pejorative. It's not really like denoting, like something that's not true or that it's a lie. There's no judgment. I'm using it in like the original sort of like origin sense of the word, to mean basically like speech and just any sort of story or oral history. So your understanding of the horizon is like, when you hear the word horizon, you probably picture a place or some zone where the surface of the earth meets the sky. And you might think of that thing as like a physical boundary between those two things, between those two elements of like the water and the air, or the land and the sky. And your understanding of the horizon is perhaps influenced by art history. But this is the definition of horizon that I'm using in this conversation. It's sort of two different things really, but horizon comes from the Latin horizontum, which comes from the Greek kyklos, but basically it means a boundary or some limitation or division. The definition that I keep finding is like marking stones and bounding circles, which I think is really interesting because it's like very material. And then the other one, horizontal, is like an adjective that describes something that's flat and parallel to the horizon. And I think it's important to like remember that the horizontality is not like on a round planet, on a spherical planet. It's parallel to a curvature. It's not parallel to flatness if you're discussing it in like a three-dimensional conversation. Sorry. There's some people who want to come. Okay, this is, all right, so with that in mind, I just thought this was a funny example of a bounding circle. It's Stonehenge in plan. Gotta go down. It's Stonehenge, marking stones. This is the geometric like example of a horizontal line. I know this stuff is all really obvious, but I feel like this whole conversation is sort of about like the inadequacy of language to describe space. So I'm trying to like give it like, an honorable attempt at like describing space. This shows a horizon in a spherical scenario, and that you could have horizontal parallelism in a curved setting. Curved lines can be parallel. So, ancient people, contrary to popular belief, were aware of the curvature of Earth, but also the spherical shape of heavenly bodies. This is, yeah, basically these are images of the Parthenon stylobate, which is the, you know, the plinth that it sits on. And although like most people say that the curvature of the stylobate, it's exaggerated in all of these images, was for like optics and for like a visual effect, so that, you know, and like foreshortening. There's also some people who argue that the curvature is actually like a nod to the curvature of Earth, and that they're trying to exemplify parallelism to a curved horizon. Okay, the next term that I feel like I need to define in order to move forward is surface. Surface is often thought of as a place, as in like the place, like the surface of the top of your hand. But sur is above, and face is a really hard word to describe. Like we've gotten it boiled down to basically like form or figure, appearance, but it's hard to describe really like anything less than that. Like you can't really like break it down into like any more parts. It's like you can't further reverse engineer the meaning to some of these words. So I've kind of been thinking of surface less as a noun and a place, and more as like a position, maybe like a preposition, but a position. It's a spatial position that's above something, and it's outside of that thing, but it's not really a place in and of itself. This is a geometric example of a surface in an abstract two-dimensional graphic world. The geographic definition of surface, a continuous set of points that has length and breadth but of no thickness, I think is the best way to think about it in this context, because it implies that the surface is, yeah, it's purely graphic, it's two-dimensional. The surface is nothing but the terms that describe it. It is not actually a thing. It is only relational and described by terminology. So, okay, so now that I feel like I've like kind of untangled the idea of what a horizontal surface is, and kind of like untangled it from the world, the like material world or some aspect of materiality, we can kind of think about what shape and how to formally describe horizontality. So since it's drawn flat, you could say that it operates like a map. And you can use the information that goes across it to orient yourself across a plane. You can translate a unit of measurement into another unit of measurement, or you could translate a word into another language. Translation on the upper, what is this, upper left-hand image in this slide, translation is also is like a mathematical or like a geometric term. So in addition to like translating words, you can translate shapes, but in geometry, translating is when you slide a shape across a two-dimensional plane. You cannot translate in 3 dimensions. And it's only in the way that 2 dimensions are a part of 3 dimensions. You can't transform without the 3rd dimension. So translation is really like where it stops. I mean, yeah, you can mirror and reflect, but basically you can only move across the flat surface. So in order to move ahead in the 3-dimensional world, you need verticality. The definition for vertical that I keep coming up with is overhead, which I think is beautiful because it implies that it's, yeah, you know, it's like it has like motion. It almost has like 4-dimensionality. It's overhead above you. Comes from Latin vertex, opposite the base, highest point. And this image, I think, says a lot because, yeah, we're on a spherical mass, and all verticality is not actually just like a 9, it's not like a flat graph, it's actually radiating out from a central point. And you need verticality to have three-dimensionality. Okay, so now that we're in the three-dimensional realm, we're going to take a big leap. Okay. I am positing that the imagination is vertical and that it moves upward and outward from the central point of the human being. There is something in there, sort of like, how do you say, the shape of like the vertical imagination is that it's a projection. And I like this little image of this. This is like an ancient Greek, I think it's like archaic Greek sculpture of this dude playing an instrument, but it's really dark in here.
Here, just.
Sorry, I'm spaced out. I really like this sculpture, this little guy. But anyway, Anna, so like one of the reasons why Anna and I like connected over this subject is that in her previous project and in this one too, she is like referring to the shape of like a person's imagination as like a beam, which like a signal, BEAM, beam. And the shape of that sort of like poetically resonates with me because it is in fact like in geometry, if we go back in the slides, it is a ray. Like that is what you call that. It is a beam, it's a ray. It goes from a central point and out. So the next thing then, now that we've like described all these like kind of abstract, like graphic geometric terms, we're like here on planet Earth, it's like 3D, there's matter, and matter is really hard to describe. It's really hard to define. So I think actually just the etymological definition is sort of the best way to deal with it. And this is what will take us into myth. But matter comes from, in many, many, many classical languages, it always leads back to the word for mother, which also is like used in many other ways to imply an origin or a source. And in this way, I think that the word mother, because like if we're defining myth as speech and myth as like oral history, then the first word uttered kind of becomes the first myth. So the first kind of like innate mythology in the world is a child's understanding of its mother, right? It knows on some level the mother is the source of its existence. It knows that the mother is this like natural producer of nourishment. And the child's vertical imagination literally projects out a godlike quality onto the mother. So the mother in this way is like the child's first experience with the divine. And since mother is often the first word, in my mind, mother is sort of the first myth. So, cave painting, we're really taking a leap here. So basically, I'm thinking of the imagination as like speech in the mind before it's left the mouth, or in the artist's case, like in this slide, before it leaves the hands. And it seems like to me that if this is like the physical evidence of human existence, then history is actually made by the deepest depths of a human being, like these innate myths within the human. And in being a vehicle for this kind of innate vertical imagination, the human being becomes this central instrument of time, basically. Here are some examples of how humans have things to say and want to say them. This is Calliope. I think I'm saying that right. But yeah, you know, she's one of the 9 muses. I think she's like the one of epic poetry or something. But I guess I was just thinking that with myths and an instrumentality and like being literally like a vehicle or like an instrument of time, that it also seemed significant to me that the Odyssey was originally sung and not written. And there's something in there again about the inadequacy of language to describe these sort of spatial poetics, and that it's the imagination and the verticality of it, the 3-dimensional shape of it, that is necessarily transformational. So yeah, just some images of transformation. Transformation in the scientific sense is things when they change states, like a change of state, water freezing to ice, dry ice sublimating immediately into a gas. But back to geometry, like I think as I said already before, translation is something which can only occur across a 2-dimensional surface in a purely abstract realm. And in order to transform, the word form being most important, you necessarily need to project it into a 3-dimensional one. So yeah, it's probably really obvious, but it's sort of important. So since the imagination moves vertically from a central point, you could say that imagination is projected, which in geometric terms means that it requires 3 dimensions at the very least. This is an example, I think a very fine example of the 3rd dimension. This is Hades and Persephone. He's taking her down to hell. And yeah, he's taking her to hell. And down they go. So now that we're on the topic of Hades, we're gonna get into some myths. We're gonna get in our submersible and we're gonna punch through the horizon and go into the abyss. now we're in the abyss. Now we're all in the abyss together. And we're gonna learn about some myths. So, what a beautiful image. Don't you wish you were there? So in a place like Greece, which is a group of islands which are all tied together by these like shared seas and gulfs and waterways and shit, the sea is like a character. The character of the sea is this ever-present kind of like element in their landscape and then necessarily their field of view and their, you know, the horizon that is like intuitively part of their being. I guess except for parts of the mainland, but I think it was like Plato who said that the Greeks were all like frogs sitting around a pond, that they're all just like sitting around like looking at the water. So yeah, it's beautiful. It's an island vibe. So I guess it's important to note that it's probably obvious, but islands don't sit on top of the watery horizon. They go all the way down. So there is like this very vertical relationship between all of these elements. Like there's land below the surface of the water, there's land within the surface of the water, there's land above the surface of the water. Land is the place where people live, water is the place where they don't, but land is like an access point to like get down in the water and in the watery abyss. Let's go back to this pretty picture while we go over some other stuff. So the sea, in addition to providing like nourishment and all these resources, is also the source of all kinds of conflict and war and storms and just death in general. So it's sort of like, you know, the sea giveth what the sea taketh away kind of thing. And it's that like reckoning type of vibe that makes the sea kind of, it comes to represent a cosmological boundary. This like surface for judgment and rite of passage and all of these things. It's like a barrier between here and the underworld and mortality and immortality. And it's full of characters like Poseidon. There's a lot of Bernini in this. Full of characters, rites of passage. There's these necessarily cruel aspects of Under the Sea that are they're dark, but they're not evil beyond necessity. And I think that distinction is really important, because the idea, I think, in the myths is that one must experience and survive the sort of natural cruelty of the sea in order to transform the self, and that like vertical transformation is not without resistance on planet Earth. There is this acknowledgement of the materiality of it, of like the matter that you cannot escape. So here on land, we're resisted by gravity, right? Like gravity prevents us from just like flying, off into space if we wanted to. And underwater, there's even more pressure. Like the weight of the water actually is more pressure than on land. So there's this added resistance, and this that idea of resistance is necessary to the idea of transformation. And I kind of think of it as, the tough love of the mother kind of idea. And then this is not in chronological order. It's sort of just in the order of how I like recall these things to myself. But other cultures, right? Ancient Egypt, they don't really talk about the sea very much because it's like a fucking desert or whatever. But the Nile is like a water feature, and it has like the same kind of cosmological gravity or cosmological importance. They refer to it as the mother of life and the father of men, and they have lots of deities. I couldn't really remember them all, but this one is this guy Happy. He like presides over the annual flooding of the Nile, which I think is really beautiful, because the annual flooding, visually, it affects the appearance of the horizon, and it affects the appearance of the landscape to other people. Like, yes, the flooding provides like water and fertility, but it also literally changes the appearance of the landscape. Another dude is, what is his name? Tefnut, I think. Tefnut, Anaket? I can't remember. It's Tefnut or Anaket. But she's a goddess of like fertility and nourishment, but, tied to the Nile specifically. This is just the top of a column that's like inspired by her hat, which I think is like really a beautiful, it's a great hat, and it's like an even better piece of architecture. Nephthys, goddess of rivers, but also death and mourning. And then finally, this dude who I love, there's a lot of names for this dude. There's like Nonette, which is I think the like kind of lady version of him. But his thing is that he's the god of the primordial watery abyss and all that is unmanifest or yet to be manifest. Wow. He looks sick. He's basically like made of wavy water. And it's beautiful to me that there is a deity for kind of a state of no state, that this is the absolute zero. Like these are zero people. They're into like getting to, they like want to get into the abyss. They're interested in going to zero. I really like this guy. There he is. Okay, another culture. This is a little Bible quote for everyone. In Genesis. So yeah, earth was without form and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Pretty self-explanatory. Seems like, again, this creation myth is that existence begins with this chaotic, watery, primordial abyss. And then the same kind of vibe comes up again in the Noah's flood thing, I think. Basically, it's like the apocalyptic watery flood. To me, it doesn't seem like it's just like climatology. They're not really just talking about like weather. They're really talking about this kind of great leveler, and that these hellish primordial waters basically wipe out any current form of creation and reset everything to zero again, to be created from water again. Different culture. My last miniature myth is this story about Vishnu, and there's a lot of really interesting Hindu creation myths, but I'm not an expert on any of them really. But like, this one's pretty cool. So this guy Markandeya, I think it's Markandeya. Pretty sure he's like kind of like a human type of character, like a human pilgrim, and he's walking around and he comes upon Vishnu. Like, Vishnu is asleep. He's always sleeping or dreaming, it seems like. And he's sleeping with his mouth open and he's snoring. And this guy, Markandeya, like slips and falls into Vishnu's mouth. And when he falls into Vishnu's mouth, he falls into this other world. And inside of Vishnu is this beautiful image of creation and all that is wonderful, and it's very psychedelic, and like his mind is totally blown. And then it turns into this dark, turbulent sea. This, like, they keep referring to it as like a dark sea. And he gets the sense that he's just going to disappear. He's going to become a part of this dark sea that cannot be described and is this total nothingness. And it's very scary. And then when he finally realizes and accepts that he must become the dark sea, it's like you must give in to the nature of this matter, he is miraculously projected out of Vishnu's mouth and freed of the abyss. Here's this really crazy floating sculpture of Vishnu. Crazy idea for a sculpture, I think. Yeah, and just some final words. The sea is, in myth and on Earth, in everyday corporeal life, is this unfathomable, bottomless abyss, and the horizon is not a graphic line. It's not an impenetrable barrier. Matter is necessarily a permeable membrane, and you can move through it vertically. Using your vertical imagination, you can travel through other cosmological worlds. And if you think about the difference between the water of the sea and the air above it, which is really like mostly water vapor and some other elements and a few molecules are different, then like, what even is that boundary that really separates those two cosmological worlds? At that point, like, the glassy surface of the sea is basically a mirror, and yeah, I mean, it's like as above, so below, basically. That's my final thought. And that's the end of my slides. Thank you for coming and listening to me talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. We're celebrating
Thank you.
here by hanging out. All right, I'm gonna stop the share now.
Okay.
We're all here. Look, you can see all your fans. See?
So cool.
Look.
What up? Well,
Cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll just open it up. Really, I mean, can just be kind of pretty disorganized. Like, if you have a question, a comment, feel free to unmute yourselves and just holla at your girl.
blast
over here.
it out.
Or if you'd rather just type it in the chat, do that. And,
Just go off, you know?
yeah. Kylie loves to argue, so.
No!
So yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, well, I can say something.
Okay.
What I'm thinking about is how that horizon out there and all you pictures of the water out there, it's this completely, it's not one place.
What's that?
Because of the curve and also because of the atmosphere and all that. It's somewhere out there, undefinable. And that picture of Stonehenge, or that definition of horizon as a boundary, you know, at first when I looked at it, I thought, well, that's really weird because it's so close to them. How can they think that's the horizon?
Mhm.
But it's really pretty arbitrary where you decide the edge is.
Yeah, totally. Totally. See, Miss Sarah's like down with the clown. Yeah. So
Can I say something?
Yeah. Go off, King.
So I really enjoyed your presentation, and I love how you made a correlation between a Cartesian plane and myth, because at the end of the day, you know, as you know, Kylie, I'm obsessed with myth and with religion and theology, and every religious narrative, if you were to strip it down to a basic shape, what you're talking about is a center and a margin.
Yeah.
And in that margin, as she just said, it can be arbitrary, but I think that there can be a million margins, but I think that we all know that the ultimate margin, the way I would define it, is non-being.
Mhm.
So I think that what's so great about what you talked about is that it really creates a relationship between being and non-being, and it's I just thought it was a beautiful imagery, and thank you. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Kylie.
Hi.
What are your thoughts on perspective? Because I think actually building off of that last comment, being and non-being versus subjective and objective,
Yeah.
I feel like you can't have a horizon without perspective.
Dude,
And perspective is a very human point of view.
I know, it kills me, man. I can't sleep at night. The nights I stay up awake, conflicted over my feelings about perspectives in drawing. How do I feel about it? Okay, I don't know anything about it because it's the most like unknown shit ever. But it's like I guess I used to think that things were objective and could be mapped objectively. And then I realized that they can't. And so I'm more sympathetic to perspective, because at least it's if it's done right or something, if you do it with accuracy, because precision doesn't exist in a perspective system, right? There's no such thing. It's like you can't really say it's precise, but you could say that it's accurate. If you do accurately perform like perspective looking and drawing, I guess it's like earnest and honorable in its attempt at mimesis, which I think is human nature, and therefore I'm like now more receptive to it as part of my own personal growth and trying to be like a more reasonable person and not like an abstract person in a like a flat drawing, like a plan and elevation person. I am trying to be more open to it. I don't know. I mean, what do you think about it? Like, I fucking hate a perspective drawing, but I get it.
I'm anti-perspective these days, but it depends on the season, I think.
Yeah, it's hard. It's sort of like, I'm like, fuck, is it like down, are we like boiling this down to taste? Because I can't even have that conversation. You know, it's really hard. I don't know. If anybody else has experience with this.
Can I say something about perspective? I think what comes to mind with perspective is the word rotation. And I think rotation has to do with cyclical. And I guess I agree where I think perspective is an illusion.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a pagan worldview versus, I'm kind of going off here, but a pagan worldview versus, let's say, like monotheistic or sort of plural or truth-based worldview or narrative worldview. But I think perspective has to do with rotation. I mean, I don't know. And I think that when you're looking at a sort of a pleroma or a totality, there is no perspective. It's almost all manifesting.
It's like a field. It's just this like, it's like, but then that almost feels more chaotic, like Brownian motion, because it feels unmappable or something.
Well, you need an extra dimension, I would say.
Or just like a good tyrant.
I have a question that's based on what was just said, I guess, in terms of rotation versus non. In my head, I was thinking horizontal, vertical, they're both linear. And then I was thinking how it correlates to imagination. And do you think there's a such thing as there's linear thought. Can linear thought be horizontal and vertical? And if that's the case, is there a difference?
That's a good question. I guess like in the terms that I was thinking about it, that basically an idea, it's almost like the difference to me between ideology and philosophy or something. So like ideology can kind of only exist on this flat horizontal plane, dependent on the circumstances, the spatial circumstances of the plane. But that like philosophy or something like using rhetoric to create a system that could then multiply itself precisely, not accurately, but precisely, is more vertical, I guess. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, you need a good tyrant.
Yeah.
It's just Kylie's answer for everything.
No.
Well, a good tyrant gives you safety.
That's right. If the mothers come,
Gives you edges.
Mhm.
I'm gonna turn the screen sideways.
Hmm.
How do we see the whole screen?
You like
Anna?
that. You like that. What else we got out
How
there?
do we see everybody?
Here we are, everyone. Kylie prefers the gallery view.
Yeah, I like the gallery view. I like to see.
Oh, yeah. I keep thinking about this image. I used to think about a lot. I haven't thought about it for a while, of myself and then, you know, by extension, everyone else being kind of this point from which go out and come back all sorts of connections to everything and everyone I've ever connected with. And that as I go through time and space in my life, I am connecting. It's sort of like a chemical structure of me and everyone else. And then when you add the concept of horizon to that, they're not infinite anymore. Those rays.
Totally. Yeah. That I think is kind of what I'm getting at, is that like a horizon is this, it is like a boundary and like a limitation, at least like the way that we've come to use it linguistically, and therefore necessarily like spatially, we've just accepted that it is limited. And I think that there is like, it's also interesting to think about like what you're saying with like chemistry, right? Like I kind of think about, yeah, the person as like a central transmitter or something. And you're like, when Anna said the beam thing, I think that was like, that kind of struck a chord with me. Like it's like everybody has some kind of like internal frequency, and you're kind of striking out, trying to like harmonize with other beings. You're trying to use these relationships and these relational aspects to make a little order out of the chaos, kind of. And like yeah, like chemistry is a good one, right? Like you're trying to like get the right amount of like relate to other atoms so that you get the right amount of electrons and everybody's happy. Or like electricity is a good one. Like, you're a negative charge, someone is a positive, you're trying to like get neutral. It's interesting how, and it's weird, right? Because you can't decide, is it the language that we use to describe these scientific phenomenon that makes them sound like this and makes them sound relatable to our human experience? Or is it the other way around? Is it that, like, is it just a coincidence and everything is related in that way and everything is really similar? Or is it just similar because actually language is really clunky and this is what we've arrived at? Is that there are things in science and in physics and in math and in geometry and all of these ways that we describe the material universe that sound so similar to interpersonal relationships? Like, why is that? Is it just the language problem, or is it innately like that?
I wouldn't call it a problem, though. I would say it is the language, but it's not necessarily a problem. It's being human. That's how that's our way of interact. I mean, language, visual or verbal or written,
Yeah.
and the connections between words and how we think about things. I don't necessarily think it's a problem or a barrier.
The function of language, by definition, is imprecise.
Yes, absolutely, and always changing.
You'll never solve the problem, Kylie.
Yeah, but reality is irrational. And so the question is, like, we keep talking about the little tyrant. And I asked myself, what would you gain if you were to be imprisoned? You would gain time. You would gain the ability to, you would gain time, essentially. You would be encased in something. You would gain a type of internal freedom. And I would say that the boundary, sort of like the margin that encloses you, like language is a type of margin as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the things that could be are now encased into a thing, is a logos.
Mm-hmm.
And by encasing things in a prison, which is a sort of logo-centric thing, that yields the material world to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
So so we take the unlimited potential of the world, and we encase it in these limited structures that are imperfect and irrational. But in return, we get the ability to manipulate the material world by creating a limitation around it.
Yeah, it's like a prison of your own making or something.
Kylie, I have a question for you in terms of how you look at the horizon. For you, is it something that functions as like a relationship between water and air? Is it like this surface imaginary, or is it something that separates it? So like, does the surface exist despite the relationship between these objects, or due to the relationship between these two objects?
Yeah.
Is it a separation thing, or is it a connection thing, or both?
Yeah, separation versus connection is like a really good way of putting it, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a connection, because to me, like, surface, I'm trying not to think of surface as a boundary. I'm trying to think of surface as a little bit more of a membrane, or like a position. It's not a membrane. It's a position above another thing. So because it's above something, it's related to it. And in my mind, that means they're connected, not separated. And I think, like, also like what Miss Sarah was saying about, like, when you look at the horizon, like, because the Earth is a sphere, it's like, if you know that, then it's obvious that it's literally physically connected because on a sphere, it's a continuous surface. Everything on a sphere is a continuous surface. Like there's like a graphic, I feel like, that they show you in school when you're a kid in like, maybe it's math class or science class, I can't remember, but it's like of a little ladybug just like walking around a sphere like an infinite amount of ways, that like the ladybug could just like walk on the sphere for like infinity and never fall off, like duh. But yeah, I'd say it's all just connected and not separated.
I think it's important to understand that a surface has two sides in that case.
Yes.
So like
Separation.
the way I understand you saying it, it's like it's not separation, but it's actually connected because that surface is touching both sides at the same time.
Yeah, it's connected vertically and horizontally.
Yeah.
Like horizontally across the surface, but if it's necessarily permeable, then presumably it's also connected vertically.
So it's just like the ultimate relationship, you know, because it exists in every plane,
Yeah, it's
the
just
horizon.
it's just a fluid. You're just swimming around in
You're
the
just
fluid.
in the deep abyss. It is the ultimate relationship, actually. That's a good way to put it. I mean, I don't know. I have a lot of questions, but I'd rather give the space away. I have lots of like selfish questions about this, like in regards to like Snow White and love, I guess. And in terms of like, okay, fine, I'll ask you a question.
Okay,
like,
fire away.
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm just, you know, my position around like the imaginary and like love necessarily being having like a strong relationship to the imaginary. I'm sort of curious to hear, well, first, like how do you relate imagination and imaginary? Like, are those things, is this just another form, is it like the imaginary just like another form of imagination? And if so, then like,
Yeah, the
do you
imaginary.
agree with me or not?
Yeah, I think the imaginary, I guess, God, semantics is hard or something, whatever you call this topic. I guess it's like, to me, imaginary is a form created by, or a form derived from, generated from the imagination and the act of imagination.
Yeah.
And like image, but image comes from, see, this is where it gets weird. So like the word image comes from emulate, and emulate goes back to copy and mimesis.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's true.
to me, I immediately think of a mirror, and
That's good.
in like a love scenario, to like relate it back to your project and your question about love, I guess I think of it as, yeah, like in the act of trying to like arc out and kind of complete the circuit, you're like looking for that mirroring or something like of equal opposite. And in that way, I think, yeah, like etymologically, like, yeah, image to emulate to mimesis goes straight back to love. You know, if anyone's ever been in love, it's sort of, that's what you're going for or something.
Well, no, and then I feel like, yeah, that like the horizon is like the ultimate. It's like
the ultimate,
strangest like distorted mirror.
Yeah, it's a fucked up distorted mirror. Yeah.
Well,
is that,
I mean, I don't know if we have one last question, but yeah, where we can just like end it here, and I can.
We can end it now.
end meeting for all.
I have a question. I have another question.
Okay, Andre.
So the word matter means mother.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this in the past. And the word father means pattern.
Yes, pattern.
What is the relationship?
Oh God. I mean, do you have another Zoom call to like this? Yeah, I mean, pattern, like DNA, the pattern for life, the pattern for society. Daddy makes the rules, daddy makes the government. You know, you came out of mommy's pussy, but daddy makes the rules. That's how it works. Daddy is pattern, mommy is mommy. But mommy is the ultimate pattern because she is the pattern of nature, not the pattern of rhetoric and language and all this shit. She's like the ultimate.
Well, she's entropy.
She's or well, I don't know how I feel about entropy. This is a different conversation. Okay, but she's the nature of things.
This is what Daniel says.
Mommy makes the rules, daddy just thinks he does.
We
Thank you,
gotta
Daniel
chat.
Lowe. That is a great comment. Thank you, Daniel Lowe. Yeah, you know, I think
Okay. I'll say that just made me think about something. So talking about the border, the margin, the ocean. So oh man, this is I don't even know if I can articulate this. Okay, so the act of defining, of creating a margin around things, that's a tyrannical act. As
okay, but to like naming, defining is naming, right? To name
right.
it is to know a thing, but to know it is to like control it, which is what's fucked up about love. That's how this relates to love. You start naming things and knowing what's going on. Bad news. Keep it a mystery.
The fall.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe entropy. All right. I'm like succumbing to this argument, this long held argument of yours. We'll continue that on another day.
Well, it's being and non-being. It's the relationship between the two. They're both integral.
Yeah.
And order and chaos. It's like we're talking about earlier. Like every myth is about the relationship between the center and the margin, a man and a woman. Order and chaos, entropy and tyrannical structure,
Mm-hmm.
rigid, fluid, circular, phallic.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yes.
I mean, is there a better way?
Go to Andre for analysis. You're like,
I love it.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
This is Kylie White.
Thanks.
KylieWhite.net. If you want to check out, she's an incredible sculptor.
Thanks
She
for
has
coming.
a show coming up in LA at Moskowitz Bays. September 11th is the opening.
Yeah,
Don't
lucky
want to
day.
miss it. But thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming.
All of you. And
Thank you.
Kylie.
Love you, Kylie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.